The wind does not whisper tonight, it drags through the alleyways of Pittsburgh like a warning clinging to brick and bone. You stand still in the shadow of a church whose bell hasn't rung in decades. The stone is blackened by coal dust, the door, sealed tight, but you feel it behind the walls. The silence is too thick to deliberate, like something is holding its breath. 12 years, 157 deaths, and not one of them left behind a body, only graves, rows and rows of headstones, marking names without remains. Mourners wept over coffins, sealed in haste, lowered under candlelight as hymns tried to cover the echo of nothingness inside. No one asked why the coffins felt so light. No one dared, and those who did only whispered among themselves, afraid the questions would be answered and something worse would awaken, because the church said it was God's will, and who were they to argue with God? But God did not answer. When Eleanor Arkwright vanished, not a single trace left behind, not a scream, not a footprint, just the announcement that she had passed, followed by a funeral with no viewing, no doctor's note, no investigation, just a grieving husband, Thomas Arkwright, standing tall beside an ornate casket that carried only ceremony. And when the priest said, "Let us pray," the crowd bowed their heads, but some eyes remained open, watching the casket that never creaked under its own burden and wondering if they were praying for her soul or for their own safety. Look at the records now, yellowed, frayed dates, circled names, scratched out, and there it is, her name, Eleanor Arkwright, listed as deceased, cause unknown, followed by the others in the years after. Women, children, old men, all part of the same church, all buried in the same cemetery, and none of them ever seen again. After the funeral you feel it, don't you, that ache behind the ribs, the one that comes when the truth starts to press in, because truth is not a light, it's a weight, and once it sits on your chest, you can't breathe until you uncover it or die trying. So ask yourself now, what kind of faith lets you bury 157 souls, without proof, without peace, without bodies? And if no one was inside those coffins, then where did they all go? Pittsburgh in 1887 was a city built on fire and ambition. Smoke clawed at the sky like a starving thing. Chimneys coughed endlessly and steel flowed like molten religion. But beyond the foundries, beyond the noise, there stood a church too clean for its city, too quiet for its time. It perched on a hill, like a secret, like it was listening. The parish called itself St. Erasmus the Faithful, its doors always open, its halls always warm. Father O'Malley stood at its heart, a man with soft hands and a voice that folded doubt into silence. He had no enemies, only confessions, and he kept them all like treasures. Locked behind stained glass and candlelight, the people loved him, not because he promised heaven, but because he made them forget they lived in a city with dirt beneath its nails. The Arkwrights were not ordinary believers, they were royalty among soot. Thomas Arkwright made his fortune in river trade in engines and barges and salt. His ships moved goods, his words moved men. His wife Eleanor was porcelain and wind hair, like ink, eyes like storms. People said she was delicate in soul, too sensitive for this world. Others whispered of sickness, but none could name it, and Thomas never spoke of it, except in past tense, as if she had already begun to vanish long before her body did. She rarely left the house. The windows of their mansion were always closed, and the curtains never moved except once late in October, when a neighbor swore she saw Eleanor staring out her bedroom window, not at the street, but upward, lips moving like a prayer or a curse, her hands gripping the glass so tightly they left prints even through the frosting. She was gone. No noise, no illness, just the announcement, a note posted at the church doors: Eleanor Arkwright has passed. May she rest in peace. And the funeral followed in 2 days. The casket was white wood carved with lilies. No one saw her body, not even her own family. Thomas said she had made him promise, and Father O'Malley nodded, as though the holy owed the rich a certain kind of silence. The townspeople did not question it, not at first. It was easier not to. The Arkwrights were generous, their grief sacred. The church was their compass and their shield. But then came another death. A young girl named Clara collapsed during Mass, her body stiff before she even hit the floor. Her parents were told it was a seizure. There was no autopsy. The funeral was held in the same church by the same priest, and the casket was sealed before they could see her face. One of her cousins whispered that the coffin was too short to narrow. Her shoes didn't fit inside. Weeks passed, and a third death came. A shopkeeper, well known and always healthy, dead in his sleep again. No viewing again, no questions. The church buried him the next morning, under heavy fog and dim bells. A pattern began to take shape in shadows. First, then in breath, then in blood. But the town didn't speak it out loud, because speaking it made it real, and real things bite. Only a few dared to look too closely. An old woman who kept a diary of the dead names, dates, oddities. One entry read: the bell tolled twice, today, not 3. Does that mean a soul was missing? And a young man who worked for the undertaker said the coffins felt wrong, said they made no sound when lifted, said he heard whispers in the sacristy that stopped the moment he turned the key on. Through it all, Father O'Malley never changed. His sermons remained soft as hands, unshaking as eyes, heavy with knowing, but never saying. He told his flock that death was not an end. but a passage, and sometimes passages must be walked in darkness so that the soul may carry its light, and they believed him because they needed to believe something, anything other than what the earth itself was trying to tell them. The cemetery behind St. Erasmus grew crowded stones, sprouted like weeds, and the fog clung longer. Each morning mothers began keeping their children indoors after sunset, not because they feared men, but because they feared silence, feared what moved just beyond the lamplight, and sometimes, beneath the ground. You begin to feel it too, don't you, that this wasn't just a town with a tragedy, it was a town with a rhythm, a pulse built from grief, carefully arranged, not by chance, but by hand, and somewhere in that design someone had drawn a line through Eleanor Arkwright first, and the rest followed. Quietly, without protest, like they had always. Meant to be forgotten. It was the fourth death that changed something, not in the church, not in the priest, not even in the words of the eulogies, but in the way people looked at each other during the services, longer, quieter, as if each was waiting for the other to speak first, waiting for someone to finally say, "This isn't normal, this isn't right." The boy's name was Henri, barely 9, pale but not sickly, just quiet. His mother said he loved bells, used to run outside every time St. Erasmus rang its chimes. One afternoon, he was gone, no illness, no fall. Just stillness, they said. He died in his sleep, and once again, the coffin was sealed before the sun rose, before the doctor could arrive, before the body could be seen. His mother was told it was better that way, cleaner that way, and she nodded because no one wants to be the one who breaks the ritual. But after Henry, the unease stopped hiding. People whispered more openly. Hands trembled during communion. Some even skipped mass and said prayers at home, locking their doors behind them. A few brave souls even asked Father O'Malley if he was sure about the deaths, and his answers were always the same: gentle, heavy, distant. God works in ways we are not meant to understand, but some were beginning to understand too much. There were contradictions that didn't fit. Death certificates, signed before the supposed moment of death, bodies declared deceased by men who never saw them, names of gravediggers who didn't exist, and above all, the impossible silence from the coffins. No movement, no weight, no scent. Even the dirt over the graves seemed undisturbed, like it had never been touched, like it had never been dug. Then someone remembered Ruth, the little girl whose mother, Annabelle, had lost her mind. They had called it grief, but now her screams made sense. She had said the coffin was empty. She had clawed at the dirt until her nails broke, trying to open what no one wanted open, and when she was locked away, everyone sighed with relief, because a madwoman was easier to explain than an empty grave. A baker's apprentice named Samuel told his boss he had helped carry 2 coffins that week, both lighter than a sack of flour, and both with no pallbearers except the priest and one silent man in gray robes. He said he saw that man walk into the church at night, sometimes even sleep inside, and always leave before dawn, with dirt on his shoes and a smell of iron trailing behind him. Then there were the nuns, who had once served St. Erasmus. A trio of them vanished. One winter night they were said to have transferred to a distant convent, but no one remembered seeing them leave. No carriage, no letter, no farewell, and in the weeks after their disappearance, 3 new headstones appeared in the back row of the cemetery, unmarked, identical, untouched by flowers. The church offered no comment, and the town offered no protest. One man, drunk, most dismissed, claimed he saw something worse, said he followed the priest one night down into the crypts beneath the altar, said he heard voices chanting in a language he didn't know, not Latin, not anything human. He said he saw a table, stone cold and stained, and a figure lying on it. Not dead, not alive, but waiting. He screamed when he spoke of its eyes open and white, staring into nothing, as if it could see more than any living man. The next day he recanted, said he had been confused, said he was sorry, and then he left town. No one ever heard from him again. His house was found abandoned, but in the corner of his room, carved into the floor with something sharp, were 3 words: I wasn't wrong. Even the records became strange. Entire pages missing from parish logs, births listed but no deaths, deaths listed but no burials, and on one page left behind by accident in the priest's study, someone had drawn a circle made of thorns, with names inside, names of the dead. And in the center, Eleanor Arkwright, her name underlined twice, ink pressed deep, as if the pen had been sticking in. Still the church remained open, still the bells rang, still the pews filled, because fear is never sudden, it seeps in slow, like rot, masked by routine, and no one wanted to believe their sanctuary was a tomb with nothing inside. No one wanted to admit that something holy might have become halibut. The pattern was set now, and it was clear the deaths weren't random, they followed a rhythm, a pulse hidden beneath sermons and scripture, one that started the day Eleanor disappeared and continued with mechanical precision. The town was no longer mourning, it was waiting, and somewhere beneath the church, the waiting thing was listening. The first clue came not from a priest or a mourner, but from a box of old newspapers found in the attic of a long-abandoned print shop, covered in dust and rat droppings. Stacked beneath warped floorboards and forgotten headlines someone had hidden them, tucked them away like shame. One clipping spoke of Eleanor Arkwright's death, but the date was wrong, listed 3 days before the official church notice. The article mentioned no illness, no accident, only a vague reference to private suffering. And it quoted Thomas Arkwright as saying she is finally free, and God understands what I had to do. The line was never printed again, not in any paper, not in any memorial or another. Paper had a small buried story titled Digger Quits Claims Empty Coffins. Says he feared what he'd find beneath it. A blurry photo, a man with hollow eyes standing near St. Erasmus. No follow-up, no obituary, just silence. A woman named Margaret Cole came forward, an old maid who had once taught Sunday school. She told the town council that she had seen something strange years ago. Before the deaths began, she had been cleaning the sacristy late one night and found a book. Not a Bible, not any prayer book she'd ever seen. Its pages were made of something soft and yellowed, not paper, not quite skin symbols lined. The margins jagged and looping like they crawled. Even while still, she gave the book to Father O'Malley, and the next day she was removed from her position and told to pray at home. Her name was never mentioned in church again. Then there were the records in the county archives. Strange omissions, years of missing parish logs, altered baptismal records, children baptized under names that did not match any living family, and most alarming, burial permits that listed cause of death as unknown, with signatures that did not match any known clergy. Some were signed simply with a mark, a shape like a closed eye. A young priest, newly transferred, named Father Gabriel, began asking questions, naive, holy questions. He looked into the graves. He tried to match death dates with funeral records. He asked Father O'Malley why the bell tolled once at night when there was no funeral, and why he found a fresh footprint on a sealed tomb he never received. Answers only warnings, gentle at first, then stern, and when he did not stop, he was sent away to another parish, miles north, without explanation or farewell. But before he left, he gave a journal to a trusted friend, and that journal found its way into the hands of a reporter from the East, a man named Ira Wren, who came looking for a story and nearly found something else. Instead, he stayed in the town for only 6 days, but in that time, he collected names, made copies of missing documents, and most notably, bribed a gravedigger to open a coffin from 3 years prior. The man refused to do it at first until Ira offered enough gold to bury his fear. They chose a grave near the back, one of the early ones. Clara, the second victim, her mother had since passed, but the stone was still clean. They opened it at night under oil lamp and rain, and when the lid cracked, the light revealed only soil packed in perfect. No lining, no cloth, no bones, only earth, as if the coffin had never held anything at all. Ira took a photo, but it came out black, streaked like the film had melted. The gravedigger fled the town that night. Ira followed soon after, but was found dead on the train days later, cause unknown. No wound, no mark, just a look of terror carved deep into his face and a crumpled note in his coat pocket with a single word scratched over and over, open, open, open. And then the symbols began to appear on the church walls, scratched into the wood beneath the pews behind the altar. Inside the candle stands always the same shape, a circle with lines like thorns crossing through, and in its center, what looked like an eye or a mouth. No one could agree which, but every time it was cleaned away, it returned darker, deeper, as though the wood remembered. Some said it was all hysteria, others said it was punishment for forgotten sins, but the most terrifying theory came from a child, a boy no older than 6, who told his mother he had dreamed of Eleanor standing at the edge of the cemetery pointing down at the ground, her mouth sewn shut, her eyes missing, and her hands soaked in ink. He said she whispered to him without sound, said they were never dead, just taken. And still the priest spoke of salvation, still the church was full each Sunday, but some who attended swore they heard something beneath the floorboards during the sermons. Something breathing, something pacing, and others said they smelled iron and wet stone, and that their prayers echoed back in voices not their own. The clues were there, scattered, buried, scratched out, and buried again, but together they formed a shape not yet visible, not yet understood, only felt in the marrow of those who stayed, those who listened, and those who could no longer sleep without hearing the dirt shift just beyond their window. The scream came just before dawn, sharp, enough to slice through brick, thick enough to wake the dead, but no one opened their doors. They all heard it, but they did not move, because by now fear was no longer a spike, it was a slow drip, and everyone had learned how to drown without making a sound. Annabel's house stood crooked at the edge of town, its windows boarded, its garden overgrown, but that morning its door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind, and on the front step she knelt, hair matted with soil, fingers bleeding, her nightdress torn, and her eyes wide and blank, as if she had seen something so final her mind couldn't hold it. She had gone to the grave again, Ruth's grave, for the 3rd time. She had waited until the fog was thick and the world was asleep, and she brought no tools, only her hands, only a need so deep it broke her bones from the inside. She had dug through the night, whispering her daughter's name again and again, until the earth gave way and revealed what she already knew and could not bear to know. The coffin was open, cracked along the seam, and inside was nothing, not a thread, not a tooth, not a single remnant of the girl she had kissed goodnight that last time. And as the wind shifted, she whispered to no one. They never buried her, they only pretended. She was taken again that night, this time by men from the hospital, white coats and quiet hands. They wrapped her in blankets and carried her away like a wounded animal, and those who watched said she didn't fight but her mouth moved, silently, lips forming a shape no one could read. Asterisk at the church father. Oh, Mally prayed, as always, voice steady, hands folded, eyes lowered, but when someone mentioned Annabelle, his voice paused, just a breath, but it was enough to notice, and when he resumed, he no longer said her name, only said, the mother of the child. The families who still trusted him began to feel it in their chests, like ash thick and dry. The funerals had become faster, sometimes same day, sometimes before sunrise, always sealed, always hurried. The prayers shorter, the hymns older, as if the church was trying to remember something ancient and failing. Asterisk a woman named Lillian began to write letters. To the diocese she wrote 7 before she stopped, each more desperate than the last. She had lost 2 sons in 1 year, both declared dead without explanation, both buried without her seeing their faces. She wrote that she had gone to the cemetery at night and found 3 graves warm to the touch and heard whispers beneath the soil. She begged for someone to come and open them. Begged for someone to tell her what was under all this silence. No one came, and after her 7th letter, she was found at the edge of the river, her body untouched, her mouth filled with salt, though the river had no tide. The church said she had drowned herself from grief. The letter in her coat pocket said, they're still alive somewhere, and they're listening. A young boy named Elias began to speak in sleep. His mother said he would sit up in the dark and point toward the church, and say the man in white robes is calling them back. They forgot something in the earth, they have to go back. She took him to Father O'Malley, who smiled and blessed the child and said sometimes children dream what we are too proud to feel, but when she asked if the dreams would stop, he said no, only the questions would. Grief was no longer sorrow in the town, it had become hunger clawing behind ribs, scraping at the lungs. Families stopped holding funerals. Some refused to bury their dead at all, choosing instead to keep the bodies in their homes, until decay forced their hands, and even then, they whispered apologies. As they placed the lids over faces, they no longer trusted the church to protect. Some began digging in the cemetery not to exhume, but to hide, building second graves beneath. The first hiding tokens, or locks of hair, or bones, so that even if the coffins were taken, something would remain, something would anchor their dead to the ground, and yet for every act of resistance there was a new name etched in stone. A new coffin carried under cover of dusk, always light, always quiet, always empty. You feel it, don't you? How grief twisted into paranoia, how love turned to suspicion, how a town can rot without blood, only by swallowing its own questions over and over, until it forgets the taste of truth. And if you stand too long in that cemetery, even now, if you place your ear to the ground and close your eyes, you might hear not the dead, but the sound of silence being pulled apart, like fabric unraveling thread by thread. Whispering they were never buried, only borrowed. Asterisk they tried to explain it because the mind demands shape. Even when faced with formless horror, they built theories, stacked like sandbags around the flood, but none held for long. Each bled uncertainty, each left more questions than answers. The first and most whispered theory was the oldest one, that St. Erasmus had never been just a church, that the land it stood on had once belonged to something else, something buried long before the city was born. The hill had no name on the maps before the church was built, but some remembered stories their grandmothers told about rituals and stones and chants, not in English, not in Latin, but in something older, closer to bone than to breath. They said the church had been built as a seal, not a sanctuary, that the priests were not ministers but wardens, and that the coffins had never been meant to carry the dead, but to keep something down. And when the seal weakened, when the rituals grew thin, they started feeding it again, but not with sacrifices, not with blood, with something more valuable, with presence, with souls taken without violence, taken with ritual precision, sealed away not to be remembered but to be used. The second theory was more modern, more rational, and more grotesque. It involved organ trafficking, that the bodies were removed before burial for parts sold quietly through secret channels across state lines. The church being used as a perfect laundering ground, clean funerals, clean families, no suspicion, but it faltered under scrutiny. Not a single trace had ever surfaced, no doctors, no black market whispers, and even if it were true, what organ dealer steals from children, the elderly, and the already ill? What market thrives on the unusable? The third theory was darker still, and it clung to the church like mildew, that a rogue sect had formed within the clergy itself, not of greed, but of belief, a breakaway theology that taught salvation could be bought through hollowing, that to erase a body was to free the soul, that death was not the end, but a doorway, and the faithful were meant to be guides, not mourners, not caretakers, but ushers. They believed in burial, without death, emptiness, as offering, and perhaps Eleanor Arkwright was the first willing one. Perhaps she opened the door. Some thought it was all hallucination, mass delusion sparked by fear and fueled by grief. They said people had buried too much, too fast, and made up monsters to explain the echo. But even they could not explain the footprints in the locked crypts, the vanished pages, the fact that no exhumation ever found a body, and no autopsy was ever conducted without resistance from the church. Few said possession, not metaphorical, not poetic, but literal. They claimed the priests had brought something into themselves, or let something out that the sermons were chanced that the Eucharist was a mask and the altar a doorway. They said the church had become a mouth, and the pews were its teeth, and the town its tongue, quieting the noise of doubt with guilt and root. All of Vital, the theorizal, the desperate attempts to make sense, they never led to truth, only deeper confusion and a rising awareness that the real answer might never be found, not because it was hidden, but because it was too large to, ancient to woven into the brick and the breadth of the place to pull apart without everything else unraveling with it tan through it all. Father O'Malley remained. He grew older, slower, quieter, but never faltered, never stepped down his sermons, softened, but never ceased, and when asked about the rumors he would smile the same way. A man does when he knows something terrible you don't, and is too kind or too cruel to say it aloud. The bell still rang, the pews still filled, but no one prayed for peace anymore, only protection, only silence, only that their name not be the next one spoken beneath a hollow sky, over a hollow grave inside a coffin never meant to hold anything at all. Asterisk. You stand at the edge of the cemetery, now feet rooted in the cold soil, the air thinner than it should be, breath caught like the ground itself is holding it back. The gravestones stare up with names long forgotten carved deep as if someone had tried to make them permanent, tried and failed, because permanence means nothing when the thing you're burying was never there to begin with. The grass grows uneven, here softer over some graves, harder over others. Some stones lean inward as if pulled by gravity or memory or something still moving underneath. The fog slides low, hugging the earth, whispering, not with sound, but with absence, and you wonder how many of these names belong to no one at all. The church looms behind you, windows dark, door locked, bells silent for months. Now no more funerals, no more masses, only questions left behind, clinging to the wood, like mold. Eleanor Arkwright's name still carved at the center of the oldest row, her stone cleaner than the rest, untouched by moss or weather or time. You remember the journal found in the walls, pages rotted, but one phrase still legible, written in a child's hand. They didn't die, they were taken, and beside it, a sketch of the circle, the thorn lines. The eye at the center, not staring but watching you, and suddenly, you understand that the graves were never graves, they were offerings, spaces, placeholders for the memory of presence, not for the body, but for the act of burying itself, as if the ritual was the point, and the corpse unnecessary. The silence deepens around you, the kind that isn't just quiet but anticipates noise, that waits for you to speak so it can echo back in a voice that doesn't belong to you, and you ask the question out loud, not because you expect an answer, but because you want to hear it bounce off the headstones. What kind of faith buries empty coffins and calls that peace? No sound returns, only the wind, shifting slightly like breath, moving just behind your ear, and for the first time you notice the church door is open, not wide, just a crack, but enough to see darkness waiting, like a pupil dilated too far, like the building itself is watching you. Step forward without knowing why, because something pulls you, not with force but with recognition, as if you were always meant to walk this path, as if your name had already been whispered into the wood and the pews had been carved to fit your shape. Inside, the air is still, no dust, no scent, no warmth. The candles are unlit, but the room is not dark, it's dim in a way that bends perception, walls too far, or to close the altar impossibly tall, and on it something rests. Not a book, not a cross, something wrapped in white cloth, just large enough to hold a body or the memory of one. Your feet move again, soundless, across the floor, and as you reach the altar, you see it, the carvings in the wood matching the symbols from the journal pressed into the grain, over and over, like a chant, not meant to be heard, but felt. And you know now that this was never a place of worship. It was a door, a seal, a mouth trying to stay shut, and the coffins were its words trying to silence what lay underneath. We don't know how long you stand there, hours, maybe, or seconds, until the whisper returns, not from behind, not from below, but from inside, something soft, something ancient, and it says nothing in words, only in weight, and you feel it settle behind your eyes and between your ribs like a name you were never meant to know. When you step outside, the cemetery is quiet again, the church door closed, the fog lifting, and you walk home slowly, heart beating too loud in your ears, but not with fear, with something else. Understanding maybe, or mourning for something you can't remember but feel deeply, like loss, buried before you were born. And, as you reach the edge of town, someone passes you. Eyes down, steps soft, and you wonder if they've been to the church too, if they heard it, if they saw the same thing, if they felt their name begin to unravel in the air. And you ask yourself, one last time, not out loud, just within, maybe they weren't buried at all, maybe they were called, maybe the coffins weren't meant to hold the dead, maybe they were meant to keep the living out, and maybe one of them is waiting still inside, watching, listening, breathing, just beneath the soil, under a name that's not theirs, waiting for someone like you to come close enough to hear their silence and believe it was peace.